Hi, I'm Sheena McGregor and I'm here at the Edinburgh International Book Festival with Meg Rosoff. To start, could you tell us a little bit about your latest book and how it came about?
It came about, I knew that Mal Pete had cancer and that he was very, very unwell. And when he called me to tell me that the chemotherapy wasn't working, I knew that he probably was going to die quite soon. And so I wanted to say something desperately, and the phone conversation was awful. And I wanted to say something that I could just do something, say, look, I know someone who has a special miracle cure or something. But of course there wasn't anything. And he changed the subject because in a way he was so polite. And he said, oh, damn, what I really wanted was to finish this book. And I thought, there's something I can do. So I said, I'll do it for you. I knew nothing about it, but I knew if Mal wrote it that I could probably finish it for him. And that was sort of, it was just, I wanted to give him something from my heart, and that was the best I could do. And his widow then sent it to me a month after he died. He died very soon after that. And I read it and I loved it, and I just knew I could finish it. So that's pretty much the story.
Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to continue working on somebody else's story, both practically and emotionally, after they were gone?
The practical stuff was no harder than working on one of my own books. And in fact, I keep making an equivalence with, adopting someone else's baby. It was a book that was close enough to my heart that I knew what to do, I knew how to do it, and I didn't have a living author who I had to phone up every time I said, can I take this sentence out? So it really was like taking one of my books, halfway through a draft and saying, right, what would I do next? And that's how I worked on it. And, in that sense, I really, really enjoyed it because for me, he'd done the hard work. He'd done the plot, most of it, and he'd set it up. And so, the revision is something I like to do anyway. It's a challenge, but I enjoyed that. I can't remember what the second half of the question was. Emotionally. Emotionally, it was fantastic because it kept me in contact with him through the entire process of writing. It was as if I could hear his voice the whole time. That made a big difference to me. And when I finished it, I didn't expect it, but I felt terribly sad because it was as if I had lost him again, really.
Talk us through a day in your life as a writer.
There isn't really a day. When I'm writing, which is not most of the time, then I kind of wake up and walk the dogs and fool around on Facebook and read my emails, and by about 3 p.m, I start writing. I can write until 2 a.m. But most days aren't like that. I spend much more time thinking than I do actually writing. I'm a very fast writer, but I'm a very slow thinker. So it takes me sometimes 2 years sometimes more, to kind of germinate the idea for a book. And on those days, what do? I pace, I drive my family crazy. I live in London most of the time. I read books. I go to galleries. I bite my nails down to my elbows. That kind of stuff.
One thing your books have in common is a sense of emotion and feeling in the characters. How do you achieve this?
I have a big theory about throughness, which is that a writer needs to have a passageway through to their unconscious, and that has to be kind of a clear passageway. And so a lot of the time, when you get a strong sense of emotion from a book or from characters, it's because the writer, him or herself, has a very strong sense of connection with their unconscious. And that's the only way I can describe it. I mean, there's, sometimes you read a book and it just feels dead. And I think it's sometimes because the writer is paying much more attention to the actual words or the sentences and less to how does this character make me feel. And sometimes I have to stop when I'm writing and actually think, I've gone wrong here somewhere. what would the character actually say? What would I say in this situation? And then I realized that the dialogue is wrong because I've been following the wrong path. You know, I've been trying to guide them in a direction that they shouldn't go. Whereas if somebody comes up to you and says, you know, your dog is dead, you don't then say, oh, that dog was the love of my life. You say, oh, Christ, how much, you know, you say something else. You say something, you know, really from here. And that's what I try to do when I write.
What do you do when you get stuck in a part of a story? How do you cope with any obstacles you encounter during your writing?
I think every single writer in the world gets stuck. And sometimes when I teach, I get, you know, students, adults, a room full of 30 adults, and I say, now, what are you doing here in this creative writing class? And they all say the same thing. They go, oh, I got halfway through the book, and then I got stuck, and I didn't know what to do next. And I feel like having a dart gun and saying, look, everybody gets stuck halfway through a book. That's what being a writer is. You know, having said that, there isn't a silver bullet. If there were a way to get out of being stuck, and being stuck is horrible. You feel the book will never work, you know, you started in the wrong direction, you know, it's going to be terrible, you know, it's a disaster. And, you know, there are millions of ways to deal with it. You walk away. Sometimes you have to walk away for a week and, you know, let your brain mull it over. Sometimes you have to sit at the typewriter and just say, not the typewriter, the computer, and say, okay, what would happen if the character did this? Or, no, that doesn't work. What happens if it does this? I had one character, and I was trying to send him somewhere. And I kept sending him to the airport and then sending him off to the Orkneys and once to Greece. And I kept writing these things where he went off to all these different places. And in the end, he wouldn't go anywhere. So I left him at the airport. And he just stayed at the airport for weeks. And so, you know, sometimes you feel your way through. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you talk to someone. You know, and I have a friend who is absolutely fantastic at plot. And I tell her what's wrong, and she says, have you tried this? And I go, oh, that was obvious. So, yeah.
Why is writing for young people and about young people so important to you?
It's not important to me. I'm writing for myself always, but I'm interested in adolescence because I had particularly sticky adolescence. I didn't know how to become a person, and so I spent literally decades of my life excavating that idea. You know, how do you become a person? People tell you, is what they tell you right? You know, I discovered that a lot of what people tell you about how to be a person is wrong. When you're a child, you know how to be a child. When you're a teenager, what happens is you're trying to be grown up, but you don't know how to do it. And then eventually you realize that nobody knows how to do it. You have to do it the way you want to do it. Some people never figure that out. Some people, you know, figure it out when they're 40, when they're 50, when they're 60. I feel I'm still figuring it out.
In 2016, you won the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, which is an international prize awarded to a YA or children's author whose work champions humanistic values and is of the highest quality. Can you tell us what it was like to be recognised like that, and what effect it has had on your hopes for your writing in the future?
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. It was the one award I entirely assumed I would never, ever, ever win. And in fact, when they called me to tell me, I first thought it was somebody trying to sell me a mobile phone, and then, because it came up Sweden on the phone, and then I thought they'd actually called me to ask for a quote because I assumed somebody like David Almond had won. So I was very shocked. And there's a funny thing that happens with awards, that when you win, you at first feel very unworthy, and then you sort of start to think, okay, I will accept the fact that they think these books are really important. So, I mean, it was an extraordinary honor, and I tried to be worthy of it, basically. How will it affect everything else? I mean, it's a big chunk of money in the bank, which is both good and bad. It sort of takes the pressure off writing, but sometimes I think the panic and the worry about will my family starve is actually really important to writing. But it doesn't affect the way I think about myself and what I have to do. I don't really believe most of what people say anyway, you know.
And just to finish off, what's the most important thing you've learned as a writer?
I think the most important thing I've learned as a writer is how the job of being human is to understand as much of our place in the world as we possibly can. There's almost nothing else we can really do. You can try to be a good person, you can try to make the world a little bit better, but you know that all of that is, you know, it may happen, it may not happen, but what you can do is to make your place as a human being a kind of more centered, more thought out, more interesting, more powerful, more just to be the best human being you can be. And actually you discover that kind of stuff through writing.
Thank you very much for speaking with us.